So last time we had finished by introducing the idea of social costs for the monopoly. In other words, is there a way that we can get the monopoly to produce even more, thus increasing the value, the net value of production? So just by way of a warm-up exercise, why don't you calculate the social cost in this example? Just a couple of minutes, and then we will move on. What is the deadweight loss in this example? Okay, well, let's see what our social cost is now.
Oh, Professor, sorry.
Go ahead.
I have answer. It will be 200, I think.
No,
Social cost.
go ahead.
I mean, social cost will be 200.
Okay.
It will be the area of rectangle, ABC.
Oh, I see. But remember that the rectangle represents the transfer payment. In other words, the monopolist could have charged a price of 5,000 tenge and still cover the cost of production. But instead, it charges a higher price of 10,000 tenge per dose and not 5,000 tenge. At that higher price, it will support the high price by cutting back on output to 30 million doses. So in this case, the monopolist is charging 5,000 tenge more for each dose that it is producing. So the rectangle here is not the deadweight loss per se, but instead just represents the profit that the monopolist is making at the expense of the consumer. It does not reflect the amount that is being produced in this case. So let me put this on the whiteboard where it may be clear what's going on. So here's the drug market. We will measure doses in millions. And then, of course, there is our demand function for drugs that represents that the maximum price that somebody is willing to pay for a particular dose at the margin. And then, as you know, marginal revenue has a slope that is twice as steep in magnitude as demand. So it is cutting the horizontal axis as a point that is one half of the intercept with demand. And then in this particular case, there is the marginal cost of production, 5,000 KD. I'll call it MC. And then here's marginal revenue. Marginal cost is 5,000 KD in this case. So I'm going to measure everything on the vertical intercept in terms of thousands of KD. Okay, so the monopolist decides how much to produce by equating marginal cost to marginal revenue right here. That would be 13 million doses. And then it charges the highest price that it can for 30 million doses by beating that maximum value at the margin right up to the demand function. So the monopolist is pricing each dose at 10,000 KD, even though each dose costs the monopolist only 5,000 KD to produce. So the rectangle, but it is a rectangle, represents in some sense the profit that the monopolist is making by charging high prices. Average cost, that is the cost per unit. Each dose average cost is only 5,000 KD. But the price charged for the monopolist is not just 5,000 KD, but instead the 10,000 KD. So the monopolist you need somebody who has a monopoly on spelling, I think. The monopolist is making 5,000 KD per dose. So the total profit is the amount, the markup that it makes per dose times the number of doses that are produced. In this case, 50 million doses. but that, or if you find a formula easier to understand, in this case, profit is equal to the price minus average cost to the amount produced. And that is for sure good information. However, in the usual point of view of economists, that profit does not represent the social cost, because all that has happened is that customers are now paying the profit to the producer without any change in the level of production. Okay, so far. So what is social cost? But this represents the amount that the producer could have provided without losing any money, and that would have generated a net value. But because the producer does not produce that much, there is a loss in terms of the best that the monopolist could have done for society. The loss of net value on output that the monopolist does not provide. So in other words, the monopolist is not producing enough. In this case, the monopolist could have produced 80 million doses. But it does not. Instead, it produces only 30 million doses, even though for the additional 50 million doses, that the value to the consumer is greater than the cost of production. That 80 million, even though the additional 50 million doses would have been valuable to provide. If the consumer is voting, but pay the production cost of those additional doses. The value of the production foregone is the deadweight loss. And that is a true social cost, because it represents production that we do not enjoy. So the total cost in this case is, I think, divided this statistic before, is represented for the triangular area. So if we denote the area algebraically from point A to point D and point C. So now we're in a position of that we can calculate that amount. So this is a right triangle. That is, we have 90% of angle. That's a value of, as you know, 1/2 times base times height. In this case, the base is 50 million doses. That is 80 minus 30. Potential production minus actual production. So I will use scientific notation and denote a million is 10 to the power of 6. Right there. So what is the height of a triangle? 10 minus 5 or 5,000 tenge. Five times 10 to the power of 3. That's just 10 to the power of 3 is 1,000. Okay, in terms of your home fee, what is the total cost in this case in terms of tenge? Look at it. We have 50 times 5, and then the 10 to the power of 9, or a million. But on the half of that amount, or 125 million KD, is the deadweight loss. That is the value of what does not get produced for the monopolist.
Excuse me, Professor.
Go ahead.
Is it million or billion?
No, well, I'm to know this. Let me change my answer. Billion. Good.
Thank you.
No, thank you. That's good for an additional point of extra credit when you catch me in a mistake. So you will have lots of opportunities. Any questions about the deadweight loss? So even though consumers are not very happy about paying the maximum price, the payment of profit per se to the monopolist is not the deadweight loss. It's just the payment, nothing more. So I think that's good for a couple points of extra credit for the entire class. And there is the answer. Can you see the screen?
No.
Okay, let me fix it. And now you can see it, I think. Okay, good. So there's another puzzle for you, a different kind of market structure, although you're still talking about the monopolies. But you take a moment to calculate the deadweight loss in this particular example in a couple of minutes, and then we will come back together as a class to discuss how this problem differs from the original one. A couple of minutes. Thank you.
Is this $60 billion? 60 billion tenge.
Oh, well, let's take a look. So I will put this on the whiteboard for ease of analysis. So just again, we will measure on the horizontal axis of this in millions. And then as always, for simplicity, is linear. And there is marginal revenue. But now marginal cost in this example is no longer a constant. Instead, as is more realistic, marginal cost is rising as output increases. That is, it is more expensive at the margin to produce a little bit more than they have already had a large level of production. And there is marginal cost. And then at this time, the losses is maximizing production, maximizing profit at the level of output that exceeds marginal revenue from marginal cost. That is at 40 million pennies. And then it charges a price of 8,000 tenge. At the level of production of the marginal cost is only 3,000 tenge. So you can see that marginal cost is rising as production rises. In particular, for 80 million doses the cost of producing one more dose is 5,000 tenge. So, in principle, the monopolist could have produced 80 million doses at a price of only 5,000 tenge, could spend enough of money to more than have covered the cost of production to each additional unit. Okay, so this began the calculated the profits in this case. Well, I guess first we want to take a look at the deadweight loss. Now, before, on the previous problem, we had only one deadweight loss. That was the loss to consumers. So, quickly, in that example, we had a constant marginal cost, and therefore marginal cost was equal to the average cost. And there it is. Because average cost is constant in this case, average cost is equal to marginal cost. Otherwise, either average cost would have been rising because marginal cost is higher, or average cost would have been falling because marginal cost is pulling it down. In this case, average cost is constant and therefore equal to marginal cost. And there is the deadweight loss in that example of a triangle from the ABC. the deadweight loss in the example at the left is just the loss to consumers of foodborne production. If the producer does not have a deadweight loss in this case, okay, to now consider the new example and note that marginal cost here is not constant. Instead, marginal cost is rising with the level of production. So now we have actually not one, but two that also to take into account. First, that is the loss to consumers of foodborne production. So in this case, foodborne production is represented by 40 million doses, 80 minus 40 million doses. So that loss is before is represented by the right triangle right here. Since the triangle is showing that the value of each additional dose from the demand function is compared to the potential price. In other words, for these additional doses, the marginal cost is lower than 5,000 kg. So the doctors could have provided those 40 million additional doses at a price of 5,000 kg and still cover the cost of production, but it does not. So we are losing the net value of those additional 40 million doses. Then there's A, then B, and then C. So this triangle is measuring the net value of production to the consumer that the monopoly is not providing. So what is the value of that consumer loss? Look, as always, that's used to successfully observe them. Obtains the height of 3,020. Or to use scientific notation for simplicity, 30 times 10 to the power 6 times 3 times 10 to the power 3, 20. One that times 120 times what did this time so that I don't make a mistake. 10 to the power 9 of billion. So 50 billion twenty. This is the loss only to consumers. Okay, so there is also a loss to the monopolist because it is foregoing profits that it could have had. So here is marginal cost. Now suppose that the monopolist had provided the additional 30 million doses at the price of 5,000 tenge. The price of 5,000 tenge is greater than the marginal cost of those additional 30 million tenge. So, Bob, you could have, in principle, to the provided another 40 billion tenge for the 40 million doses. At a price of 5,000 tenge. Because the price is higher than the cost of preventing each additional dose up to 40 million. In other words, in the graph, 5,000 TV easily covers the multiple cost of production from 40 to 80 million doses. So the process foregone, the what about is a triangular area that represents the net operating profit that she could have realized when the additional production. That profit foregone is a loss just as surely as the loss that consumers are facing because of foregone production. It is a triangular area of DCD in this case. So once again, he had a right triangle that is the 90-degree angle. And so he's a measure of the area that is potentially inferred once again. The rate is 40 million. And then the height of the triangle is 5 minus 3. In thousands. Well, 1/2 times 80 billion volts in terms of painting. Well, 100 billion painting. So in other words, the cost of rising marginal costs triggers a deadweight loss sustained by the monopolist as well as a loss to consumers. The total deadweight loss in this example is the summation of the areas of both right triangles. That is 60 billion paid to consumers. Thus, a loss of for the building taking supervisions for 100 building taking in all. So the point of the problem is to be careful that you don't predict that maybe the producer should have made more profit as well as the consumer in terms of utility. Questions about that problem. The, the, the distinction occurs because when marginal cost is rising with production, the competitive price will more than offset the cost of production. That's the reason. Okay, so far. And there is the summary of the discussion. So let's now move on to a philosophical question that I think you'll enjoy thinking about. Why, from the economist's point of view, would it be efficient to get rid of the deadweight loss by increasing production? And what do they mean by efficiency? Any guesses to the answer to this question? That there may be several answers that are correct.
Efficient, Professor, maybe efficient means when total surplus is maximized.
Oh, the total surplus of meaning to consumers as well as producers. Okay, and why that particular definition of efficiency sounds good, but why did we adopt it as economists? So let's see, surplus represents net value. The net value could have been awarded to somebody, leaving that person better off without hurting anybody. So, for example, maybe we begin a factory that produces pizzas in Almaty. The factory has a profit of 10 million tenge. To take that 10 million tenge and people award it to Adana, then Adana is better off and nobody else is in the So let me make that change to Adana benefit and nobody is injured by the transformation. That's the basic idea. So in this case, we have the potential net value of an additional 3 million doses. Of 100 billion kg. In principle, of we could go ahead and produce both doses for a value of 100 billion kg. And then award that amount to IDEP. Then IDEP is better off, a lot better off. And no one else is worse off. Nobody else has lost utility or income in this story. So that change is desirable. That's the basic idea behind making monopolies more efficient, but compelling them to produce more than before. So that is the intuition behind the approach of efficiency for the monopolists. These are a simple details. I will give you a moment to read this slide and then people discuss it. In our example, he had a potential improvement and they have awarded a back an additional 100 billion kg. A back profited and nobody else was suffering because of the change. So people say that we have political efficiency if we have made all the political improvements possible. In other words, if you make all of those changes that help somebody without hurting anybody else, now we have political efficiency. It sounds like a very weak definition of a good outcome, and this is very weak just to say that people be satisfied if nobody is ever hurt, that one of our changes. However, we use the benchmark of parental efficiency because we don't know how visibility compares to mine. No way for us to objectively measure utility. It is truly subjective. You have a utility function. I have one to determine compare the two. So this is an example for the monopolist. In this case, both the monopolist and the household are benefiting by the extension of electricity to that household. Nobody loses until this is a parental improvement. And then here is a couple of puzzles for you to try some extra credit in the next couple of minutes. So first, consider person one. You send the checkbook to a mirror for 10,000 changes. This set the potential improvement. Any ideas?
I think only the first one is Pareto improvement.
Okay, continue.
Because it does not make anyone better off or worse off. Both Amir and other person get something in return. But
go ahead.
Thank you. But in case of the government, they take out 1,000 tenge from you and give it to another person. So it makes you worse off in this situation. That's why it's not Pareto improvement. The second one is not.
Good job. I think it's very well stated, yes. But any trade, for example, for a textbook, must be a political improvement because otherwise the people making the trade would not have consented to it. You are better off by selling the textbook, and a mirror is better off as well. And then, as Nuvei says, the second question involves redistribution of income from you to me. And then, because I get the money, the two lose because we were compelled by the government to pay me. And not a parental improvement. So And there in the slide, you have the conventional argument for economists. But economists should stick to efficiency and not analyze the policy of income. If the income distribution from that point of view is a separate issue. But now, in light of that perspective, consider what is happening today. The United Nations is calling for food to send to Afghanistan because of starvation. Afghanistan is now facing a famine. Now, from the economist point of view, is there any way of justifying that aid to Afghanistan?
In my opinion, it is not about Pareto improvement.
Okay, why not?
Because like there is the opportunity cost rather to help your citizens or Afghanistan citizens, and when you choose Afghanistan, you like make worse off, as Nurai said, your own citizens, and that's why it's not Pareto improvement.
Okay, that's a very thoughtful answer. Presently, the resident of Afghanistan is Afghan. Afghani is a currency. So, is there a way that you can justify the aid if you cannot justify this political improvement? The economists have anything to say about this policy. So the UN proposes that Kazakhstan can 1 billion kgs just of food to Afghanistan. If this is not a political improvement, can we justify the aid on other grounds? No one right answer to that problem, I think, but I'm still interested in your views. So there's one possibility, though that this is really realistic, to consider it. Suppose that people get utility from knowing that the income distribution has become more equal. In other words, they gain satisfaction from the knowledge that they have presented families in Afghanistan. In that case, maybe this is nothing more than a straightforward trade. The access to food and you and I to satisfaction from knowing that we have bought family. From the point of view, maybe the food aid is indeed an increase in political efficiency. It is a political improvement. But that's just a controversial perspective. Other questions or comments?
Professor, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So it's just actually thought, yeah, it is not action. And so like we gain nothing, we send food, but our people worse off. Is it right?
No, that's a good point. Yes, the opinion one doesn't take it away from Pakistanis and giving them to Afghanistan instead. So this Pakistani groups can pay for food to Kazakhstan, Afghanistan. But proposed about learn how to spell. Proposed that Pakistanis are willing to pay to Peggy just to know that they have presented family. In that case, Athens, Spain, when Pakistan is doing as well, because of the knowledge. This is strictly a controversial point of view. So I'm not saying that I'm correct. I'm just offering that opinion for your own perspective. Any other thoughts on family or political improvement? So the main point of the discussion the voluntary trade is usually a political improvement. And this is desirable. And the thing that the truth outside of the trade. And now I've done overtime, so I will stop here.